My name is Stacy. Before I begin, I want to tell you two things. First, all of my movements are part of my disability. It's not unusual for me. Secondly, I'm using my phone to speak to you. I have a bunch of buttons programmed to press. When I originally prepared this presentation, the conference was going to be in person. Now that we're doing this over Zoom, it kind of adds another layer of technology to things, but we'll do the best we can. I apologize for any delay along the way with technology. We'll have a few minutes at the end of the presentation for questions, so please hold your questions until the end. A quick overview. I am going to take a few minutes to talk about my childhood and schooling experience. Then, I'll get into my college years and adulthood. I'll talk about employment and care needs sporadically through this because it's really part of my story. So, let's get started. Many of you are probably wondering what happened to her, right? Let me explain. My mom had a completely normal pregnancy, and I was the first grandchild born on both sides, so you can imagine the excitement. When I was born, the umbilical cord slipped out before I did, and when I came out, I laid on the cord squishing the oxygen out of me. I was essentially born blue and was without oxygen for 8 minutes and was given my last rites. I was even pronounced dead at one point. Doctors were able to revive me, and I was rushed by ambulance to another hospital where I stayed in the neonatal intensive care unit for 12 days. During the first hours of my life, I had multiple seizures and was on a respirator. At 3 months old, I was diagnosed with atherosclerotic spastic cerebral palsy. In my situation, it affects all of my muscles and I need assistance with all of my basic needs such as toileting, dressing, and eating. Cerebral palsy is considered a non-progressive condition, meaning it doesn't get worse over time. Side note, I will talk about this more later. I started therapies when I was just 8 months old. When I was about a year old, I started an early intervention program. Teachers and therapists would come to the house a couple times a week to work on sensory things with me. I got my first power wheelchair when I was just 2 years old. I remember going around in circles in the driveway of the wheelchair place the first day I got it. It didn't take long for me to learn how to drive it, though. It was my first means of independent mobility. When I was 3 years old, I started in early childhood classes. When I was 5 years old, I was tested and was found to have average to above average intelligence. I was placed in a regular kindergarten class with a one-on-one assistant. I continued in all regular classes through high school. I received occupational, speech, and physical therapies during school. Throughout the school years, I had various accommodations like extra time on tests, but even though assignments took me much longer to complete, I never took any modifications. I wanted to be just like everyone else. I know it's pretty unheard of in today's world, but I was incredibly fortunate to have the same assistant with me from second grade through senior year. We remain close to this day. I must say that I had a pretty incredible school experience. Since I was in all regular classes through high school, kids got to know me and accept me for who I was. I was involved in extracurricular activities like Student Council and National Honor Society. I also attended almost every football and basketball game in high school. I feel like by kids seeing me at various activities outside of the school day, it made them realize that I was no different. I had 3 best friends from elementary school on. We did everything together. I attended every school dance there was, even though I never had a date. It didn't matter. Those friends included me in whatever they did. We're still friends today. In fact, I was in 2 of their weddings a few years ago. I think we'll always be friends. After high school, I took a huge leap of faith and attended UW-WHITEWATER. At the time, I didn't realize how huge of a thing it was because all of my friends were going away to college, so why shouldn't I? Looking back, almost 20 years later, I don't know how I ever had the guts to do it. Mom says that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and she's right. That was probably a very good thing. I had no expectations and didn't know what to anticipate, so I just went for it. When I moved into the dorms in Whitewater in 2003, I'll be honest, I was scared to death. Not only did I have to get used to being all on my own like all of the other freshmen, I had to get used to having all different people take care of me. Until that point, my parents and family did all of my cares. In the beginning, I didn't even get to meet the workers who would be helping me before they did their first shift. I don't know how I ever felt comfortable doing that, but again, I didn't know any better, so I just went with it. It was very rough at first. In fact, the very first morning after I moved in, the aide who was supposed to get me up was over an hour late. I ended up rolling off my bed onto the floor, rolling over to my computer desk where my phone was, pulled the phone cord down. The receiver clunked me on the head, and I was trying to call my parents when the aide walked in. Yeah, imagine that. Here I was, an 18-year-old, literally the first morning after I slept somewhere completely by myself, and no one showed up to help me get up. Yikes. Again, I don't know how I ever had the guts to stay down there after that first fiasco. Things obviously got better. Whitewater is nationally known for serving students with physical disabilities. I was in a regular dorm room, but I didn't have a roommate for 2 reasons. One being I had so much equipment that I had to bring along, and the other reason was because some of my personal cares were done in my room. UW-WHITEWATER has a place called the Center for Students with Disabilities, where students go to receive various services. I received services such as note-taking, testing accommodations, which included extra time on tests and a scribe, transportation, and many others. One really unique thing Whitewater has is a physical therapist on campus. I went to therapy twice a week. The therapy room was combined with the wheelchair basketball team's workout room, so, admittedly, therapy became more of a social time. Whitewater has both a men's and women's team, and they have won multiple national championships. It's pretty cool to watch. I started out majoring in business, but after struggling through a couple of econ and accounting classes, I switched my major to journalism with an emphasis in advertising. I wasn't able to take the full amount of credits for the first few years, so it took me a little longer than most people. Down there, I had 4 or 5 care shifts a day. It was cool because most of the workers were also college students. I became friends with most of my workers. At first, the care agency didn't like the idea of us being friends because it's supposedly unethical or whatever, but it's almost impossible not to become friends with the people who take care of you. Eventually, the care agency basically gave up on trying to prevent it and just tried to ignore it. By the time we graduated, they loved how close we all were. There are a group of 4 of us who became really close and still are best friends to this day. I had some of the best times of my life in Whitewater. I loved it because I didn't stick out as being the girl in the wheelchair down there. I had some crazy experiences at UW-W. One time the fire alarm went off like at 2 in the morning. I was stuck in bed and I heard sirens. While trying to call my parents to see what to do, I accidentally called my grandmother. Yeah, oops. I quickly hung up on her and gave up on trying to call. Someone did let me know what was going on. The elevator had started smoking. Another time, I was on the third floor of the business building, and the power went out. The fire department had to carry me down the stairs and put me in my manual wheelchair until the power came back on. My friends and I still laugh about that because it was made into such a big commotion. Those are just two of the many, many stories I have from my time at Whitewater. There are several more that my mom probably doesn't even know about. As you can probably tell, my 6 years in Whitewater were the best years of my life. I grew up there and proved that I could live independently if I had the right supports. It was awesome because I also became friends with others who have disabilities. During my school years, as much as I hate to admit it, I avoided hanging out with others with disabilities. In my high school graduating class, I was the only one who used a wheelchair and who was nonverbal. Although most of my classmates got to know me and understood that I was no different than them, there were some people who made assumptions. I always did everything I could to make sure I was as quote-unquote normal as possible. I always felt like I needed to prove my intelligence. In college, though, it was different. There were many people with disabilities, and there was no need to prove anything because we knew that everyone had earned the right to be there. I was fortunate to become friends with people with different abilities. It's neat because we share experiences and learn from each other. My UW crew is a very unique group, but that's what makes it fun. Looking back, almost 20 years later, taking the leap of faith and trying it at Whitewater was the best decision I've ever made, right, Mom? I think, in fact, I know my parents would have much rather have me start college classes at UW-WHITEWATER and live at home. I often wonder where I'd be today if I hadn't gone to Whitewater, and I honestly don't know. It was so important to make the big transition when all of my peers were. Back then, it just seemed like the natural thing to do because everyone else was doing it. Now, I realize just how big of a risk it was. I'll always be proud of earning a degree, but college was so much more for me. After college, I began realizing how incredibly frustrating the long-term care system is. I moved back home with my parents in Fond du Lac and was planning to find an apartment in the area. I met with the ADVOCACY and chose to be an IRIS because I wanted to self-direct everything. I was planning to find an apartment in the area. First, though, I needed to find caregivers. I can't live on my own without assistance. We had to find agencies that would bill medical assistance or IRIS personal care. There weren't many places that did that. In the 2.5 years I was at my parents', the most agencies could ever staff was about 3 hours per day. I need at least 6 or 7 hours of care per day, so that wasn't going to work. I eventually moved into the Willow Apartments in Oshkosh. The complex is set up for people with disabilities. The units are all wheelchair accessible and have features like open closets with no doors and lower countertops. When I first moved in, Cerebral Palsy of Mideast, Wisconsin managed the apartments and had sort of like a care agency. They provided care to the residents of the complex. They were willing to bill IRIS personal care. It was the perfect setup. That lasted about 5 years until changes to IRIS personal care made it no longer possible to have third-party vendors. At the time, I didn't want to have the responsibility of hiring and scheduling all of my own caregivers, so we had to find agencies that would bill medical assistance. There were only 2 agencies in Oshkosh that billed this way, and I supposedly chose the best. I only lasted with the agency about 8 months, and it was an absolute nightmare. I had no shows and people were late all the time. I also had problems with theft and other things. In fact, the very last week I was with them, a worker showed up and told me that she had literally just been released from jail. At that point, I knew something needed to change. I switched back to Iris Personal Care and have been hiring and scheduling all of my own caregivers for over 5 years now. It's a lot of work and can be incredibly frustrating at times. I advertise on places such as Indeed.com and Facebook groups. It's quite a process. When I need more people, I first post an ad on those websites, and when I get some applicants, I forward them to my mom and she calls the person to set up an interview. When we interview people, my mom comes up to help me with this. If the interview goes well, we have the person fill out the 40-page packet of paperwork, and then my mom scans each page and emails it to my Iris consultant to look over, and then she sends it to my fiscal employment agency to process. If there's anything wrong with the paperwork, the whole packet gets sent back to us to correct. The whole process is repeated until the paperwork is correct. Once the paperwork is all right, it takes an additional 2 weeks or so to process. Often, by the time the worker is approved, they have found another job or are no longer interested in working with me. I bet we've sent over 100 packets in, and over half of those people never even worked a single shift. It's incredibly frustrating. I have problems finding people and filling shifts all the time. People quit with no notice or don't show up for shifts. I'm fortunate that my parents are still able to take care of me, as they often have to do shifts when people call in or don't show. A few years ago, we were having so much trouble finding people that I was going to switch to family care, where they manage all of your care. It was very hard to do this because I felt like I was giving up my independence, but I was willing to try it. After meeting with the ADVOCAcy, I started working with a managed care organization to set up a plan. Well, let's just say that it ended up not working out. They were trying to piece together a plan that involved several different care agencies. I didn't like the idea of working with more than one agency. I then asked what happens if one agency decides they can't fill the shifts anymore. I learned that if they couldn't find enough help, they'd end up moving me to a facility. As soon as we heard that, my parents and I decided to stay in Iris. I'll likely stay in Iris until my parents are no longer able to physically care for me. When that time comes, I'll likely have to move into a facility. As disheartening as it is, it's the reality I live with. Knowing this, I'm soaking up the limited years I have living independently. In terms of work, my journey has been a crazy one. An insurance company deemed me unemployable at the age of 4 without even meeting me. Of course, I don't remember that, but that's what my parents tell me. That has always stuck in the back of my mind. I knew I could prove them wrong, and I have over and over again. Before even graduating from college, I started working. In college, I had the opportunity to write a column for my hometown newspaper about living with a disability. It was voluntary, but the exposure was incredible. I also had the opportunity to be an online mentor for high school students with disabilities. It was through a program at UW-Madison. I did that for several years until the program unfortunately ended. After college, I worked with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, DVR, to try to find more employment. I participated in 2 employment programs and had a couple of work experiences where I designed ads for coupon magazines from home. I enjoyed doing it, but nothing came of those experiences. I ended up starting my own graphic design and social media business. I advertised on places such as Craigslist and Facebook. I did a few small jobs, but it wasn't enough to keep me busy. In 2014, I was hired by In Control Wisconsin as their communications specialist. In Control Wisconsin is an organization that supports self-determination and self-directed supports for people with disabilities. I manage the Self-Determination Network, which is an online community for people who support self-determination and self-directed supports. I also help with their website and do some graphic design for them. It's the perfect job for me. I'm able to work from home, and it's obviously something I'm very passionate about. In recent years, I've gotten more involved in disability advocacy. I've been involved with various types of advocacy, such as being a host on the Self-Determination YouTube channel. I also have served on various disability advocacy boards. I was on the Independent Living Council of Wisconsin for a few years, and I currently am on the Long-Term Care Advisory Council and the TMG Citizens Advisory Council. Both councils help to make decisions about long-term care for people with disabilities. I have been at the Capitol several times talking with legislators about what needs to be changed. I've also been a part of several news conferences and have written multiple letters to legislators and newspapers. I've realized that one of my main purposes in life is to advocate for all people with disabilities. If my circumstances were a little different, I would have been a teacher. I absolutely love teaching and helping people, especially kids. I am realizing that I am a teacher. It's just in a different way. Advocacy has given me a purpose in life. Technology has played a huge role in my life. Simply put, I wouldn't be able to live independently without technology. I literally depend on various equipment to do almost everything. From power wheelchairs to many different types of augmentative communication devices, to my elaborate computer system, which includes eye gaze so I can type just by moving my eyes, to cell phones that I use to do several different things, the list is truly endless. I always tell people that I grew up in the right era. I can't even imagine what my life would be like without technology. I can't wait to see what the next big thing will be. Maybe accessible self-driving vehicles? We'll see. I've been following the development of those pretty closely. We're getting closer and closer. I'm not sure if it'll happen in my lifetime, but it's awesome to think about. What's next? What's next for me? I really don't know. As I mentioned in the beginning, cerebral palsy is a non-regressive condition. In other words, it doesn't get worse over time. However, in the last 10 years or so, I've experienced multiple health issues. In the last 9 years, I've had 8 surgeries. I have a baclofen pump inserted in my back. It drips muscle relaxant medication directly into my spinal fluid to help reduce spasticity in my muscles. I've had 4 emergency gastrointestinal surgeries and multiple digestive issues. CP doesn't directly cause these, but they are secondary effects from what CP has done to my body. In recent months, we've discovered that my body can't handle any kind of stress very well. I've had to cut back on some work and advocacy opportunities because my body just can't handle it. It's frustrating because my heart and mind wants to be able to do so much more, but my body says no. I'm slowly learning how much I can handle and when I need to say no. Many of my friends with CP are having problems as they age too. It can be mentally draining at times. I'm learning that it's okay to feel this way, and it's not shameful to ask for a little help. I'm incredibly fortunate to have a great support system who is willing to help me in any way they can. In closing, I want to say life is what you make of it. No, life isn't fair, and yes, sometimes it does suck. But we have to make the best of what we have and not focus on what we don't. Thank you for your time today. I hope I inspired you to keep moving forward with whatever life has in store for you. Remember, we only have one chance to live. We have to make the most of it. Are there any questions?
So we just have a couple minutes. If anybody has a question, you can put it in the chat and I'm
Solo tenemos
happy
unas
to read it.
preguntas.
Or you can I think you're unmuted, so you can just ask the question if you want.
Creo que es
Awesome job,
hacer.
they're saying. Yes,
Muy
it
buen
was. an awesome
trabajo.
job.
Sí, muy buen trabajo. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta?
There is a question. What do you think would be helpful to get more caregivers? Pay?
Hay una pregunta. ¿Cuál tú piensas que es? ¿Qué crees que sería útil para conseguir más cuidadores? ¿La paga?
Pay and insurance coverage.
Pay and insurance coverage. Yes, that's probably very true. Let's see. How should you handle bullies? What is your recommendation to people on bullies?
Stacy's gonna type an answer out.
Okay, great.
Educating them is the first part of it, and letting them know that you, just because they don't know, they can learn a lot from her.
Just so you know, that's Stacy's mom in the background helping.
Question.
Hold on one second, because Stacy's going to answer the bullying, and then I'll be happy to have you ask her your question.
Okay, thank you.
It just
Yeah,
takes a
education. Yeah, education.
education. All right. All right. Lawrence, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could post your presentation. I came in a little bit late because of technical difficulties.
I believe the presentations are available in the online. That's a good question, but
Because I
do
didn't see it there.
okay, I'll make sure when we get there'll be a follow-up to the conference, so I'll make sure that that gets attached if it is not already. The video will be available, and I think Stacy also did the keynote with the video, so.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? I know we're kind of at the end, and I have to go start a lunch bunch for the group, so. All right, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. So
One more, actually.
Oh,
one
okay,
more.
go ahead.
It just popped into my head. Where do you get a network of caregivers for backup reasons? It's been very challenging for me and my friend Mark to do this. It's almost like you're on your own, and Iris, they're of no help. And I noticed Stacy's comment about, I noticed your comment, Stacy, about putting you in a facility when the caregiver agencies couldn't provide. And Mark has trouble with strangers coming into his home. I'm just wondering if there are any ideas out there.
So any ideas for backup caregivers?
That you can trust.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Stacy's typing, give her a second.
Thank you.
Larry, I'll email you. I know you.
All right, that's a
Yep.
that's a good plan, Stacy. All right, I'm gonna close this up. I think thank you very much, Stacy, and her mom for joining us.
Thank you.
A great presentation. And join me in the lunch bunch room. I'm gonna be hosting that in just a minute.
When does that begin?
Right now, so I gotta go over there.
Oh, is it that late already?
Yep, it's 11:15. All right,
Oh, wow. Okay,
thanks
thanks.
a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.